a part of the Silicon Valley chapter of Keiretsu. I joined about 2 years ago, and I've done 8 due diligences and led 6. Before that, I am a fintech gal. I've had a couple of exits in the fintech space. I spent most of my career back in Boston working for a company that we exited to Standard & Poor's, and then another company that we exited to BNP Paribas Asset Management in 2006. So those of you that are finance geeks in the room will understand that that was a really good time to exit. We sold that same company for 1/3 the price in 2010 to Envestnet, and I decided I did not want to go to Chicago. I had enough of snow, and I wanted a life without snow, closer to the grapes. I'm a huge wine collector, so that's when I sold my house in 2 days and moved to Silicon Valley. I worked for Dow Jones and then the Wall Street Journal, and then in 2013, I left corporate America and retired. And I was very happy for about a year, and then I got bored. So I took a bunch of classes at Stanford and about investing, angel investing, how that all works, and then I connected with Keiretsu, and my life has never been the same. I also, go back on here. I also learned a little bit about blockchain along the way. When was the first time that anybody here heard of blockchain? 2000 and what? 14, okay. Anybody else? I heard about it in 2009 in Boston, and I thought that people were barking mad. I just didn't understand it. I thought it was a joke. The Winklevoss twins were involved in it. Just didn't make any sense to me. So I left that back in Boston, and then I started hearing about it more and more in the Valley. And I'm very close with IBM. In fact, I can see them from my house in Foster City. They have a huge facility in Foster City, and very connected with Mohan, who's one of the fellows for IBM. And so they brought me into a couple of projects with them, and it was just fascinating I was helping them monetize blockchain and figure out how to make money on the financial models of it. But I started to think about some of the underlying technology, and once I got it, I was like, wow, I have to apply this to what I understand, which is institutional finance. So blockchain is a big distributed ledger. Think of it as a big spreadsheet. And so lots of data that's in the spreadsheet. But what's really interesting about it is that it changes relationships. So things that we used to have to need a trusted third party, we no longer need. So who in the room is a Blue Jays fan? Anybody? Please come up here. Come on up. And I'm going to have Kevin come up here too. Okay, and Ozan, you come too. Come on here. Okay, so your name is? Ted. Okay, so if Kevin, you and Ozan can stand here in the middle, and Ted, you're going to go over there at the end, over here. Okay.
I love being a prop.
Okay, it's going to be fun.
Really
okay, so stand here in the middle. Okay, over here. Ozan and Kevin right here in the middle. Okay. So before we haven't met before, Ted, have we? No. Nice to meet you. Okay. So are you a rabid Blue Jays fan?
Not this year.
Okay. All right. But there's a game that's happening tomorrow night, right? Against Washington. Right, the Nationals? Okay. So when we think about businesses, and let's just think about businesses, we usually have a trusted third party in between. We all know and love Ozan and Kevin, right? So if they tell you something, you have a tendency to trust them, right? But we don't know each other. So if we're going to do business today, we're going to need to find somebody like Kevin and Ozan for them to broker this transaction, right? But as much as we love them, they're going to take a little bit of that transaction, right? Wouldn't it be great if we could do business together in a trustless manner without these folks?
You're cutting me out already.
That's what blockchain does. So if I bet you that I'm going to give you $10 if the Blue Jays win tomorrow night, would you take that bet? Okay, maybe what if I... Okay, what if I give you $100, right? So we're going to put that on a smart contract, okay? So a smart contract means that we're going to write that in a contract, and then we're going to have that contract be given to everybody in this room. So everybody's going to be a node on this network. So if everybody has that written down, that if the Blue Jays win, it's going to automatically happen. It's going to go from my bank account to your bank account without the help of these guys. Everybody knows that it's $100 written down, right? You're a sneaky little guy, right? So you and Ted are in collusion, and you say, I'm going to put a couple extra zeros on that. So you're going to have 2 extra zeros on your piece of paper. But what does everybody else have in the room? Barry, what do you have on your piece of paper back there?
1 0, 2 0.
2 zeros, 100, right?
100.
All right. And Don, what do you have on your piece of paper back there? What do you have?
I have 100 as well.
You have 100 as well. So everybody has 100. So we know that something's not right with yours. So that's the power of blockchain. Okay, so it's a big distributed ledger. So when everybody thinks about the word blockchain, we're going to think about how much we love ozone and how much we love Kevin and how we don't really need them in these transactions anymore.
Fired again.
All right, well, you've been fired because you're not able to exit stage left. All right, Ted, thanks for playing. Okay, all right. So these immutable transactions are changing the way that we do business between governments and their citizens, between different peer-to-peer transactions. So we're going to be able to have trustless transactions in a decentralized manner, and that's the power about blockchain. So we don't really need to know all the ins and outs of how blockchain works to know that it actually does work, because who really here understands how the internet works? Deeply understands. There's usually a couple nerds in the room. We call ours in Silicon Valley Russell Brand, and if you know Russell, you know he's a rocket scientist, and he always reads all my patents before they go out, so he always does know. But you don't need to understand how the internet works to use it every day. So businesses are going to be changing. I think that blockchain is about internet 1990. So we're going to have all kinds of businesses that will sprout up and resources that will be deployed that much more efficiently by using blockchain. eBay couldn't work with the internet. All different types of things that we do now, Lyft, Uber, I took Lyft the other night, that couldn't work without the internet. So all of these new types of businesses will start to spring up. So I was brought in from IBM to help a company in Napa Valley called Gliding Eagle, Jack Dwan, who is using blockchain to authenticate wine shipments into China. So from the moment that the grape is picked, all of the provenance of all the history of how that grape is put into the bottle, the temperature, how everything was handled, growing cycle, all of that information is put on the blockchain, and it is all shipped into China, so you know all the supply chain management. So you know that what's in that bottle is really Napa Valley wine. Has anybody read Billionaire's Vinegar? Fascinating story with the Koch brothers about how people were really, all the fraud that was committed in the wine business. That will not happen anymore with using blockchain. Also, all different types of financial transactions. Barry, you and I were talking last night about real estate. Think about all of the complex transactions with title. If you could verify like that somebody has clear title, you wouldn't have to be sitting on the sideline waiting for something to close. So this will have a profound effect on businesses. Very different than a lot of the stuff that we hear in the papers about crypto. So let's talk about crypto, because that seems to be what everybody talks about. It's a $700 billion industry. It went way, way up in December, and now it's gone way, way down. So there's dramatic ups and downs. But it doesn't have any backing of any government. So it makes me kind of concerned. I do own some crypto because I always like to try everything. I do have some in a hot wallet and cold storage that looks like it's just on a flash stick. Does anybody do you have some? What do you have?
Lots of people.
You do? There's a whale here, and we should get him to invest in everything. We gotta talk later.
Focusing on this guy.
Yeah. But it's a very interesting time that we're living in to watch what's happening with crypto. But it's very hard to use it. So it's not as fungible as if we had a coin in our pocket. But I don't really use paper currency at all anymore. I travel quite often, and when I go to Europe, I don't even change anything anymore. So the time is coming that it will happen, but I don't think we're quite there yet. Has anybody invested in an ICO yet? Initial coin offering? Was that a wild ride yet?
It's been a long ride.
It is. It's good.
Not recently.
Recently, no.
So initial coin offerings had their heyday last year, and there's been huge amounts of money that have been raised. I've been seeing a lot of the negative things that have been happening with ICOs. I have some friends that are accountants that say to me, you're not gonna believe this, Maryanne, I had a guy come in, they've raised $50 million. He doesn't know what to do with it. They haven't even started coding yet. They don't even have a coder. And it's folks that should be at friends and family or seed money are starting to have pools of money that are Series D, and they just don't know how to handle it, or if they're gonna be doing anything at all with it. So I think that a lot of that stuff is speculative. So I'm not surprised that last year, in July, that the DAO report came out, because the DAO report, which came out from the SEC, and I am US based, so I'm most familiar with the laws in the US, but when Andy and I were up here yesterday, we met with some of the regulators, and they felt very strongly that following some of the US regulation is happening also here in Canada. But what the DAO report said, that if you have tokens that have been issued, that they should be registered as securities under the Howey test from 1946. And if they're not Reg A, Reg A+, Reg D, that you are in violation of US law. So that came out in July last year, and everybody said big whoop-de-doo-dah. They were like, everybody's raising money, I should too. So like that was of no regard to most people. For me, that has spent most of my life under the financial institutions. I was like, wow, that has a lot of effect. And I have a couple of my friends. One had a $400 million exit selling a trading platform out of Atlanta, and another guy that spent 10 years at the Fed. So we spent a lot of the days during the summer on my back deck talking about this stuff and saying, what do you think about this? What's the SEC saying? What's the CFTC saying? And we said the time is going to come when it's going to get very interesting. So token economics are really important to an ICO. And does that token have utility? If the token has utility and you are going to be using it for some future value, that makes sense to issue an ICO. I always say to folks that if you get involved in it, you should probably look to do a registered ICO, because then you'll make sure that everybody's happy. But only 9% of the ICOs that I've seen, and the SEC has put out some papers on this as well, actually have their token economics correct. So there's a saying in the South, when do pigs become hogs? And it's when it's time to make bacon. So at some point, securities will become currencies, but we're not quite there yet. And I don't think, in my business, I do have a blockchain company in the fintech sector, and we've been spending a lot of time globetrotting, talking to the corporates of the finance elite, and the financial firms are not ready for tokenization either. So there's a lot of companies that are starting to think about tokenizing things, but the world is just not quite there yet. You know, 5-7 years out maybe, but I don't think that's going to happen yet. And there's two gentlemen in the US, one's in charge of the SEC, one's in charge of the CFTC, that are starting to arrest people. So they sent out a bunch of subpoenas on February 13th on Valentine's Day, or right around Valentine's Day. They sent out all these love letters to folks in the form of subpoenas, and they're sending them to the companies, the folks that run the companies, their attorneys, and also their investors. So as I'm talking to a group of investors, just really want to make sure that everybody here is aware that there are implications when it comes to investing in some of these things. So what I always say as a recipe for success in these things is to do your due diligence. So Barry, I'm going to call upon you again. We talked last night about due diligence, and I said, do you do a lot of due diligence up here in Toronto? And if Howard was here, Howard's the master at it. So when I jumped into Keiretsu, I was involved in the Parakeet deal. Did Parakeet come up here? No, Brad Huber's great. And so that was the first one that I worked on, and then I led 6 others, and then the last one I participated in was Wag It, the dog collar. Yeah, so I was the one that tested it out. And we put it on, not on my dog, because my dog is a 9-pounder, but I borrowed my friend, who's also a Keiretsu member, Dr. Roberta Lee, and she brought her dog Chloe over, and we tested out that. But doing the due diligence, it takes a long time. I mean, I usually spend 100 hours or so if I'm leading a due diligence. It's 150 pages of my life that I can never get back, but it's important because some of the stuff that you learn is not in the financials. It's not in the marketing plan, it's the interaction between the folks that are running these companies that usually around week 5 or week 6 comes out. Are they always gonna be pleasant when they call me back, no matter how many questions I ask, or how many people on the team, swoop in and call them? All of those things matter. So when you do look at some of these investments, I always say that the recipe for success for me is to do and conduct a really thorough due diligence. And we found some really interesting things in due diligence. There's not all of them have gone to successful completion. So I think that we live in extraordinarily interesting times. Blockchain is the most profound technology and will have the most effect on such a broad range of types of companies and industries, more than AI, more than robotics, more than big data. So if you have questions on blockchain, feel free to pick up the phone and give me a call where we can Zoom, or you can come visit me in Silicon Valley and we can have some wine.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. You'll come back.
Of course I'm back. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So welcome.
So, yeah, I mean, I've been thinking it through for the past